Today we're excited to have Cindy Daly, Policy Director at the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania, and Eileen DeVringi from the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. Eileen joined the CDS&E Department of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia in June 2014. Prior to joining the bank, she completed a graduate degree program at the University of Pennsylvania. During her studies, she interned with the Philadelphia Redevelopment Authority and the Opportunity Finance Network. Eileen has a master's degree in city planning from the University of Pennsylvania and a BA in political science and environmental studies from the University of Michigan. Eileen, if you want to start us off today.
Great. Thanks again for joining us. So I'm going to talk about some recent research our department has released around rental affordability. Most, if not all, of the indicators I'll be presenting today are actually available in an interactive online tool that's currently on our website, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. This first slide we have to include in all of the public presentations that we do, but basically the views expressed here are those of the presenters or mine, and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia or the Federal Reserve System. And so some of you might be familiar with my department, the Community Development Studies and Education Department, from previous research we've done in this space. But for others, this might be the first time you've heard of us. So just as a little bit of background, our department promotes community and inclusive economic development in low and moderate income areas throughout the 3rd District. We do this in a couple of ways. One is by conducting research on key community development issues, like the research I'll be presenting today. The other is engaging with stakeholders to learn more about what's happening on the ground and some of the best practices they're seeing, and then also convening stakeholders, policymakers on events on key community development topics. So the 3rd District is all of the shaded counties in the map there. As you can see, we don't cover all of Pennsylvania, but all of the estimates I'll be presenting do cover all of Pennsylvania. And we've included some indicators for Pittsburgh and Erie MSA, even though they're not in our district as well. So we try to keep Pennsylvania pretty well covered. All right, so I'll start by summarizing some of the key findings that I'm going to discuss in greater detail in the rest of the presentation. So first, as you would expect, the rental affordability challenges are really concentrated among the lowest income renters. However, we have seen them affect slightly higher income renters in recent years as well. Second, families with children make up a very substantial share of cost-burdened low-income renter households. And that's an important consideration from a service provider perspective. Third, again, it's important to understand the makeup of the households who are struggling to afford their housing. So we looked at some specific vulnerable groups and found that they were disproportionately likely to struggle to afford their housing. Fourth, many of the working age adults in cost-burdened low-income households were really struggling to find and maintain employment. And lastly, even though that prior finding is true, we do see that rental affordability challenges are affecting a growing number of working families. So before I dive in, just a little bit more on background on the research methods, and I'll try to keep this brief. But essentially, the data comes from. Oh, sorry, I'm getting the message to speak a little bit louder. So essentially, our data is anonymized individual responses to the census. So that includes responses about the households, the individuals who are in renter households, as well as the units themselves. So things like gross rent, utilities, number of bedrooms. And so when we conducted this analysis, 2014 was the most recent year available, and so we would assign renter households to income categories relative to the median family incomes in their region. So if you were a renter in the Lancaster metropolitan area, your income category would be relative to the median family income in the Lancaster metropolitan area. And we also assigned units to relative affordability categories based on the income level that they would be affordable to. And then we essentially aggregated those to produce the estimates for the metropolitan areas and the state as a whole. So this enabled us to compare the number of households in each income category to the number of units that are affordable to those households. So sort of a need versus supply comparison. And it let us looking more closely at the residents of those households, it let us understand a little bit what the demographics are and who those individuals are. Here's some terms I'll be using throughout the presentation that I wanted to define up front and make sure that we're all on the same page about. So the first three terms are the income categories that we categorize renter households into. So extremely low-income renters are households that made 30% or less of the median family income in their metropolitan region or non-metropolitan region. Very low-income households made 31 to 50% of regional median family income, and households in the low-income category made 51 to 80% of regional median family income. The lower income term, kind of broadly speaking, encompasses all three of those income groups. And then when we refer to rental costs, we're always referring to gross rent, which is both the rent and the utility cost for that unit. When I describe a unit as affordable and available, it means that the unit is considered affordable for a household in a specific income category, and it's either vacant or it's not currently, it's either vacant or it is currently occupied by a household that's at or below that income level. So it's available for meeting that need. And cost burden, so a household is considered cost burden if their gross rent exceeds 30% of their monthly family income, and that's kind of the standard HUD definition. All right, so I'll start by looking at the impact of unaffordable housing on household budgets. So on the left side, you see the percent of Pennsylvania rental households in these three income categories who were cost burdened, so they paid more than 30% of their monthly income towards rent. And then on the right, you see the typical amount that a household who was cost burdened paid beyond what they could afford. So for example, if you're a renter in Allentown or something like that, and you know, your maximum affordable rent is $500 a month, but you're paying $700 a month. The gap between those two is $200. So the numbers on the right represent the gap between what would have been the maximum affordable rent and the rent they're actually paying. So as you can see, there's a significant impact on household budgets of households of each level, but for extremely low-income households, it's the most severe, and they're the most likely to be cost-burdened. And many of these households pay more than half of their income towards gross rent, and so they might be vulnerable even to relatively small financial shocks. So a big part of the reason that cost burdens are so prevalent among the lowest income households is that there just aren't enough affordable and available rental units for meeting the need. In 2014, there were only about enough affordable and available units for 1 out of every 3 extremely low-income households. And in large part, this is because it's generally not economically feasible for landlords to provide a decent quality unit at an affordable price for these households without some kind of subsidy. And as you move a little bit higher up the income scale, the picture improves, but it's worth noting that even for households making 50% or less of the regional median family income, there was a substantial deficit, so only enough for about 2/3 of the renters who were in that income category. Additionally, since 2005, we've seen for each of those income thresholds, the number of affordable available units has declined, but particularly so for households in that 50% or less of median family income category. And so that was sort of the supply versus need comparison, but another way to look at affordability challenges is to look at what households are actually paying and the actual rates of cost burden among households at these different income levels. And these rates are a little bit higher than what would be implied just looking at the supply versus need. And there's potentially a few reasons for that. So one could just be sort of preferences. So some households might be avoiding more affordable units if those units are in bad condition, or if they're in neighborhoods with significant quality of life challenges, or they might just prefer to live closer to where they work. Second, older, less expensive units might be less physically accessible. They were built before there were standards for accessibility, and so they're not options for renters for whom that's a challenge. And third, just outright bias or discrimination can constrain some households' affordable options. And so again, while it's clear that the lowest income households were the most widely affected, we do see cost burdens increasing pretty substantially for households in the very low income and low income categories as well. And the extent to which households in the kind of 51 to 80% of median family income category were cost burdened varies considerably by metropolitan area. And notably, as you can see on this slide, it's notably high in East Stroudsburg. And so the rest of the findings I'm going to talk about today have a little bit more to do with the characteristics of households, of individuals who are in cost-burdened lower income households. So individuals who are paying rents that are beyond what they can afford, and they're in those households that make 80% or less of median family income. So as you can see, roughly half of all cost-burdened lower-income households were individuals living alone, but the next largest segment is families with one or more children. Roughly half of families of any income level were families with children of any income level were cost-burdened in 2014, and the challenges were especially concentrated among single-parent households. And looking at the residents of cost-burdened low-income households, nearly a third of them were youth under the age of 18. And this is an important consideration because households with children are likely to have greater demands on the household budgets than the households without children, and so the impact of unaffordable rents can affect them more acutely. So while there is some variability across different regions, for the most part, in most of the metropolitan areas that we looked at in Pennsylvania, households that were families with children made up more than a third of the cost-burdened lower-income households. And we also looked at the prevalence of cost burdens for specific vulnerable groups. This is kind of valuable information for when you're looking to develop, programs or responses to housing needs, since these individuals might have more complicated needs and might have to face more barriers to accessing suitable, affordable units. And so the specific groups that, some of the specific groups that we looked at were people with disabilities, and that includes both physical and mental disabilities, seniors, and also grandparents who live with their grandchild and are responsible for the financial needs of their grandchildren. And to develop an understanding of the kind of the scope of this challenge, I think it's useful to look at both the prevalence of housing cost burdens for these groups, but also the percentage of renter households overall that they account for. So each of these groups is, in each of these groups, the majority of individuals of renter households were cost burdened in 2014. And you can see that the challenges are greatest or most widespread at least, for households that are headed by grandparents who are responsible for their grandchildren. However, these households make up a relatively small portion of renter households overall. In contrast, while a majority, slightly lower percentage, but still a majority of senior-headed households and households that have residents with a disability, and there is some overlap there, are cost burdened. They account for roughly a quarter of renter households in the state. So our next major finding was that working age adults in the cost burden lower income households were disproportionately likely to be out of the labor force, which might indicate that they face some additional barriers to finding and maintaining employment. So the labor force participation rate of these individuals was lower than in the state as a whole, and in a sense that's not surprising because we're focusing in on a very low income group of people. So of course, folks who are out of work are more likely to be included in that pool. And it's worth noting that even though we're looking at an especially low-income subset of households, of individuals here, that the significant majority were in the labor force, were participating in the labor force. So it's hard to know specific reasons why a working age adult might not be in the labor force. They might be full-time caregivers, they might be discouraged workers, they might have some sort of medical issue that prevents them from seeking work. We have a very limited ability to explore that with this particular data set, but we do know that a substantial portion of working age adults who were out of labor force were either individuals with disabilities or they were single parents. And when you account for potentially the difficulty of finding affordable childcare, those could be significant barriers to finding and maintaining employment. For those who did work in the 12 months prior to the survey, about half of them were employed either part-time or full-time for less than half of the year. And that could indicate some degree of underemployment or a recent job loss. And certainly difficulty maintaining full-time employment would be a barrier to accessing affordable housing in the sense that you wouldn't have as much money. But on the other side of the coin, housing insecurity and instability can also kind of undermine people's efforts to improve their job prospects and make finding employment more challenging. Just to go back really quickly, it's also worth noting that close to a third of working age adults in these households did work full-time for most of the year and still had difficulty affording their housing. So it's definitely not a problem that's limited to individuals who are underemployed or unemployed. So adults in cost-burden lower-income households were disproportionately likely to have a high school diploma or less as their highest level of education, which is certainly going to be a limitation when it comes to finding jobs that pay sort of livable wages. Labor force participation is also somewhat lower for individuals with those educational attainments, so that could be also one of the things driving the lower participation rates among adults in cost-burden lower-income households. And so moving on to our last finding. So the share of households that had at least one individual, of cost-burden lower-income households that had at least one individual who was employed increased in recent years in Pennsylvania. And that makes sense given the improvement in the employment outlook nationally during that time. But it also indicates that rental housing issues might persist even as we see some of the employment numbers improve. So across the state of Pennsylvania in 2014, about 53% of cost-burden lower-income households had at least one individual who was employed. Among those who didn't have anyone employed we were including senior households where individuals might have disabilities. But across the state, 53% of households had at least one employed individual. Is somewhat consistent across the state, where half or slightly more than half of cost-burden lower-income households did have one or more employed persons. And in areas that had higher rents, you were more likely to see, in areas that had higher rents, a higher share of households had at least one working resident. And so higher rents being potentially less affordable to low-wage earners, it sort of makes sense that you would see that correlation. And so lastly, just over a third of working adults in the cost-burden low-income households were in service occupations, so things like food service, healthcare support, cleaning and maintenance. And a number of these occupations are ones where you have very low wages, kind of limited job security, irregular hours, things like that. Additionally, looking at sort of the lower wage opportunities in sales and office and production, transportation, installation, those are areas where you see a lot of temporary employment contracts, and so potentially some income volatility there as well. All right, and so that covers sort of the key findings from the analysis. These next couple slides talk a little bit more about the interactive tool that we've made available. And so for Pennsylvania as a whole and many of the metropolitan areas within it, the tool will generate 3 different fact sheets, so one covering the affordability and availability of rental units, and one that looks at the demographic profile of renters who are struggling to afford their housing, and also one that looks at the economic profile of those renters. And so these are available at the URL that's on the slide there. And there's just 2 things I want to point out. So the way that you switch between the different fact sheets is by navigating between the tabs at the top of the page. And then there's a drop-down menu where you can select the different metropolitan areas, and even we were able to include some specific estimates for Philadelphia City. And also a neat feature of this is that at the bottom of the page there's a button that enables you to download PDF versions of the fact sheets, so you can take those and use those however you may. And then lastly, I wanted to include a quick little plug for our department's Community Outlook Survey, which goes to community organizations, nonprofits, government entities who do work in the community development space. The one that we have out in the field right now is focusing on housing and neighborhood development. And so I suspect that many people who are on this call right now would have interesting things to say. And so if you're interested in participating, please follow this link. It'll be included in the PowerPoint that's sent out as well. And these are responses, the findings of these surveys we share directly with the Philadelphia Fed staff who are in charge of doing the Community Reinvestment Act examinations of banks. And so they're the ones who are determining whether or not banks have adequately responded to community needs, and this is a good opportunity to make your voice heard to them. All right, thank you. And here's my contact information, and I'll take questions at the end of the call. So I'll turn things over to Cindy.
Thank you. That was, wow, you do such great work there, and we have used the Fed's reports over the years. We appreciate the updates, and this is even more detailed and really very helpful. So besides getting depressed by the statistics, we need to figure out what we can do to alleviate some of the problems, and that gets into the advocacy that you all have been so good about in working with the Housing Alliance to address the need for affordable homes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the advocacy that we have planned coming up, particularly on the federal level. And I want to preface my comments by saying that I know there's a lot of concern out there. People are a little worried by changes taking place in Washington. From our perspective, we're going to keep doing what we've always done, because when haven't we been advocating for affordable homes and full funding for HUD and USDA programs? As long as I've been here, and certainly before, through every kind of administration, we always need to make our case, and that's what we're going to continue to do. To emphasize that, trying to advance that, there we go. I put in a budget chart from the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Now this is actually, first of all, I hope you can see it. You might how large. It might be too small. You can find the budget chart at National Low Income Housing Coalition, so NLIHC.org. What I really wanted to emphasize is the changes over time. So it's not so much what's in the current year's budget, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but really the changes over time. Some things have done okay, gone up slightly. Tenant-based rental assistance, you'll see, which is the housing choice vouchers, you'll see some increase in funding, but that's not an increase in vouchers. It's simply that the cost of rent and utilities goes up, and so that line item has to increase in order to tread water, to serve the same number of families. We did see a dip, a loss of vouchers when sequestration first hit, and while for the most part nobody lost a voucher that they were currently using, what will happen is the housing authorities don't return, if a voucher is turned back in, if somebody moves out of the program, graduates from the program, those vouchers are not put back on the street. They're not given to new families because of the funding constraints. You'll see that public housing capital fund has gone down. That's for maintaining and fixing up the properties. Public housing operating fund is has a very, well, let's see, basically level. And then there are other things like community development block grants and home that were severely hit over time. And we're looking back from the fiscal year 09, which would have started in October of 08, where the home program was $1,825,000,000, and now it is down to $950 million. And community development, trying to quickly find CDBG on here. In October 2008 was at close to $4 billion, $3.9 billion is down to just over $3 billion now. So having lost $900 million. So again, point being that we've always been doing the advocacy. We're going to keep doing the advocacy. And Tori, let me see. I put this in full screen mode so that I could read the chart, and now I'm not quite sure how to get out of it. If you would advance the slide, I'd appreciate it. Thanks. So we do have some challenges this year. For one thing, we are in a continuing resolution. There was no budget passed for the fiscal year that started October 1st. They're just continuing the funding that we had in 2016. This is a little bit of a misnomer because there actually was a small across-the-board cut in funding. But also, as I pointed out with housing choice vouchers in particular, and I think public housing, any sort of rental assistance, costs go up. So level funding is not actually level funding. Level funding means a cut. It means a cut in the number of people who can be served because the costs have increased. And so we'll get into to what we want to do in terms of advocacy. But clearly there's a new political climate, but that doesn't necessarily bode ill for us. It just means we have to make our case, and we have to adjust our messaging a little bit. There is a greater likelihood of tax reform now, even though it's been talked about for years. It is more likely. One of the challenges that we're already seeing just because of the talk of lower corporate rates is the impact on the low-income housing tax credit. A tax credit is only worthwhile because of the value of the reduction in taxes to the investor. And if the investor's tax rate goes down, the value of the credit goes down. So we're already seeing a lot of hesitation in the market in terms of what investors are willing to pay, and need to be sure that if there is tax reform, that A, tax credits are protected, and B, that that there is an adjustment made to compensate for the lower tax rates. So that's a potential challenge. Will there be GSE reform, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac? I don't know. More likely, perhaps, than in previous years. There are two ways in which that could impact the work that we do. One is that Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac currently have affordable housing targets of how much lending needs to be done in that segment. And so that could change. The other thing is that the National Housing Trust Fund is funded through proceeds from Fannie Mae, and the first time money moved over to HUD for the National Housing Trust Fund was in 2016. Actually has not found its way to the states yet. We're waiting for that. But that's a potential challenge as they look at reforming Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. What will happen to the National Housing Trust Fund? Tori, next slide, please. Oh, I think I just got back there. Okay. So I talked a little bit about tax reform. That there is the changes that may happen to the low-income housing tax credit. But also an opportunity to maybe reform the tax credit in some positive ways. There have been bills, and I think it will be again this year, bills to expand the tax credit. Is this the climate in which the tax credit will be expanded? I don't know, but it's on the table. And also part of the expansion bills were provisions that would allow for reaching lower income people by also including some higher income, low income. I mean, so by broadening the income spectrum a little bit. So rather than requiring that all of the units are affordable to people at, say, 50% of area median, that would become an average, and that would allow the developers, the owners, to go down lower and reach lower income people. Also, conversations starting to happen, at least among advocates, that if there's going to be tax reform, and one of the things that may be looked at is the mortgage interest deduction, advocates are saying, well, if there's going to be a savings to the federal government from changes in the mortgage interest deduction, let's reinvest those savings back into housing. And I believe there's a Dear Colleague letter circulating, I think Keith Ellison, to that effect, asking his fellow members of the House of Representatives to make that pledge. Again, I talked about we've always done this advocacy. Sometimes we just need to adjust our message a little bit. Something we have been talking about for a few years, and I think successfully, is that making sure people have decent, safe, quality homes actually saves the federal government and to a certain degree the state government in a variety of ways. That it improves people's health. And one of the biggest drivers of the budgets, both federal and state, are medical costs. Medicaid, to a lesser degree, related to affordable housing, I guess, to also Medicare. And it saves in other ways related to education and ability to hold on to a job. Eileen made the point of people who are not well housed, have difficult finding and keeping a job. So a lot of ways that there's an economic connection, and I think we need to make that argument loud and clear. There may also be an opportunity to tie housing rehab, repair in with the infrastructure conversation. So we don't know. We don't know for certain if if that's what people have in mind on the Hill, but Capitol Hill. But it's up to us to put it in their minds. So I see that as an opportunity. And are people hearing?
Cindy,
yeah.
Are you able to forward the slide? I'm having a connection error on my screen actually.
I just got that message also. So it says exit program. So no, I can't. But I only have one more.
I can forward the slide.
You can forward the slide? Okay.
Yeah.
That would be great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, and actually, I think I may have lost internet connection, which could be why I can't do that. So if the next slide is up, what it says is tell your story. And that here I want to talk about, reestablished. The legislative visits that we are planning now and how you can reach out to your congresspeople and our senators. So first of all, we are going to, well, let me back up and just say there are some new faces in D.C. We need to educate them. Housing is such a small part of the budget and generally not part of the public conversation. It was not discussed really during the campaigns. It's not something that the average person really thinks about. They think about taxes, they think about jobs, they think about infrastructure. They don't think about affordable housing and its impact on the communities, regardless of whether you personally take advantage of a program. So I think it's our job to educate these people. And we do that in a number of different ways. We go to D.C., and we will be doing that on March 2nd. And I'm going to tell you how you can get involved. Let us know you're interested. But that's something that we try to do a couple of times a year, and that's very important just to make your presence known and, again, tell your story. It's just as important to do district visits. While the D.C. staff, you rarely meet with the congressperson or the senator himself. In Pennsylvania, they're all himself. The staff in Washington is the policy staff. In the districts, they're primarily constituent staff, but that's okay. And actually, in the district, you may have a greater chance of meeting with the congressman himself. They're a little bit more relaxed, but whether you're meeting with the congressman or staff, they really appreciate hearing from their constituents, and they listen. And one of the additional values of doing a visit in the district is it's, of course, easier to get there for you. And so there are a lot of people who like to do that, and we can help bring together a group of folks, and I'll talk about that in just a second. A part of that group is it's really important, helpful if we can, to identify people who have benefited from these programs, whether it's a public housing resident or tax credit development resident, or someone who received housing counseling, somebody you're working with in whatever way to find and maintain a decent place to live. So, we are viewed, while we're constituents, we're also viewed as paid professionals. But bringing somebody to tell his or her own story can have a profound impact on the staff and the elected officials. Getting the electeds and their staff out to your place to see how things run, to see how this money is spent in the community, and really emphasizing that housing money is not money that's wasted in Washington. It does not fund big bureaucracies. This is money that comes into local communities, that it builds really nice-looking buildings that you can't identify from the outside as affordable housing. It helps really good people, and they'll have an opportunity to meet some of the residents. It brings economic opportunities into the community, job creation, whether it's construction jobs or property management, brings opportunities through contracting for maintenance and supplies. All of that stuff I think we really need to weave into our stories and make sure that our elected officials understand that stuff. And then I have partnering, and this gets back to who we like to have in the room when we do these legislative visits. So if you're somebody who develops affordable housing, that's terrific. Partnering, again, with one of your residents is a really good team. You can say, we build the homes, and these are the people we help. But it's also very helpful to have service providers and people who aren't necessarily in the housing world. For instance, housing is a big issue for people in the disabilities community and in the domestic violence community and senior citizens. And so if you, perhaps your legislator isn't terribly familiar with affordable housing programs, but is an advocate for people, victims of domestic violence, if you are partnering with someone in with the domestic violence agency in your community, and you can go together, and the domestic violence advocate can say, our folks have a very difficult time finding safe, affordable places to live, and a developer can say, we know how to provide that housing, but we don't have the resources. Then it kind of completes the story. It gets the legislators' attention, and makes them more aware of how vital the HUD and USDA funding is in Pennsylvania. So that's what we have lined up. Oh, so I didn't say, so that we're planning district visits for the week of February 20th or 21st. The 20th is a holiday. If you would like to work with us, join us on some of those appointments. You have my contact information. Really, Joyce and Tori, I didn't put yours on the line on the slide, but Joyce is handling more of the logistics. You're welcome to call me, but you'll get better results calling Joyce. And that would be for a district visit or the DC visits. We prepare talking points. We have pre-meetings so that people know what they're getting into if they haven't done this before. And the bottom line, to tie it back to the really excellent work that the Federal Reserve has done, is that we've got a severe and growing problem in Pennsylvania, a shortage of affordable homes, and there is a solution. There is a solution. We know how to solve the problem. We need the resources to do it. So I'll stop there and leave time for questions.
Great. Thank you, Cindy and Eileen. I am going to unmute the line so people can ask their questions. Give me one moment, please.
The conference has been unmuted.
So does anyone have any questions that we can answer? Go ahead and just speak up and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Rana. I'm at PEC. I typed it up, but I can also ask. Here too. I just wanted, should we, for advocacy, should we be focusing on those economic portions? I asked, doesn't it actually cost less money to, provide ways towards affordable housing, like subsidies, instead of, not doing anything, and then people might end up needing emergency housing or something like that.
I think it's an excellent argument, and it's one that we used in the State Housing Trust Fund campaign, particularly when you're talking in the world of homelessness, either housing people who are chronically homeless or preventing people from falling into homelessness. I mean, there are some terrific studies on housing people who are chronically homeless, and how the cost of medical assistance, emergency shelter, and criminal justice dropped by 75% in the first year of being housed. And even if you add back in the cost of the housing services, you still have a savings of about 50%. Anyway, we've got a lot of material if you'd like it, but I think it's a really excellent article.
Right here.
People mute their lines if they're not talking. Mute with a *6. I think it is the argument that we need to really be focusing on the cost savings to the federal government, and also the job creation through the work that we do.
Thank you.
What are you? Mute. Unmute.
Yeah. Mute everybody, and then you can use the *6 to unmute your line if you have a question.
I gotta go back and see my daughter.
Does anyone have any questions? Okay. Well, thank you everybody for getting on the phone today. Really appreciate it. And have a great rest of your weekend.
Thank you. You too. Thank you.
Thanks.